goal is really to have this be as conversational as possible, and try to go back and forth as best we can, in this extremely strange format relative to how things were just a few months ago. So background on me, I am actually sort of, I'm a Hamilton girl. I actually live in Dundas. I'm looking out the window at the Dundas Escarpment. And so I'm very much a local person. Have always, more or less always lived here with some exceptions, being in Toronto for business from time to time, but often had global roles. So worked overseas while still being able to work from home, being able to reside here. So lots of interesting things, right? I've worked with really big global companies. I've founded a social media startup that was the first 14 years ago. So I've kind of done the end to end, the very tiny and super stressful, the very large and super stressful. And these are what I'm going to share with you today are some things that I've learned sort of formally and informally as a leader of, very large teams and also very small teams. I've gone from teams of 12, 24, all the way up to 500, 600 at SAP and Aeroplan. And the core skills are basically the same. And this is a little bit of a bait and switch, perhaps, in a way, because I'm going to actually go through some basics with you on the phone around leadership. Those things don't change. And then I'm going to get into very specifically the kinds of behaviors people need from you when times are really tough. And obviously times are extraordinary now, but there are degrees of toughness. Sometimes it's very difficult, and you might just be struggling economically as a business, and you really have to pull those things out of your hat and kind of keep everybody focused. So if we could move to the next slide, please. All right, so what I'm going to cover off, as I said, we're going to do some basic stuff, some stuff that would have been relevant if the world was not ending and is really important no matter what. So we'll talk a little bit about leadership versus management, the difference between those two things, because sometimes people use those words interchangeably and they're super different. And then I'm going to explain a concept called transformational leadership, which is essentially getting away from managing and giving people things and thinking instead about giving them what they need in order to succeed. So it's a bit of a different headspace as a leader. And then we'll talk about how to demotivate people while achieving short-term results. So essentially what doesn't work. It works in the short term and then it doesn't work in the long term. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then we will talk about sort of the core, which is about half of the presentation probably, which is like, okay, we're in a super tough time. Now what, who do people need you to be? And, some of the misconceptions, I think, around what leaders are expected to do and perhaps the skills that they might walk into situations like this with. Because, are great leaders made, or are they born, is a frequent topic of discussion. So if we could just go to the next slide. All right, so management, the difference between the two, super quickly, management is largely about accountability. I told you to do the thing, did you do the thing? Check. So it's really very transactional, very black and white, completed, uncompleted, very, very task-based. If we go to the next slide, leadership is very different. Leadership is ultimately about creating a way for people to contribute in order to make something extraordinary happen. So it's much greater, much larger than management. Management achieves results. Leadership achieves extraordinary outcomes. And that, especially in a startup environment, having been there, that's the difference between kind of bumbling along and getting to a place where your business and your idea really are brought to life by the people you are working with, not just you. And that is a really key area of struggle for a lot of startup leaders, and as well managers kind of making the leap to being managers of bigger teams, is getting away from the you need to do everything yourself to empowering the people around you to do the things and to identify things that need to be done to be successful. But the important thing about leadership and management is they're not effective alone, right? You can't just be like the hand-waving super inspirational leader without some level of accountability around stuff getting done. And what it really comes down to is the balance, because most people start off as managers and they learn how to become leaders. So we can go to the next slide. All right, so this is transformational leadership, and this is, essentially its core definition. It's about ownership. It's about understanding what people are good at, what they're less good at. So instead of expecting everyone to be great at everything, you can really get people to focus on their strengths and look at something called strength-based strength. It's very hard to say. strength-based development, which is instead of trying to build up the stuff that you're lousy at, don't do that stuff as much. Do the stuff you're really good at. And that's been a bit of a change in the last few years in terms of leadership and management theory. And I like it because there's stuff I don't like doing and I don't want to do it. I don't want to learn how to do it to a level of mediocrity. I'd rather focus on the stuff I'm really good at. So that is a big part of transformational leadership, is getting to understand people and what it is they're good at. So there are 4 basic components to transformational leadership, and I'll go through all of them individually. So if we can go to the next slide, it's the first one is idealized influence. So as a transformational leader, a role model that inspires your team, one of the things you do in order to achieve this is by gaining trust. And you gain trust by doing what is right, no matter how difficult it is or how unpleasant. And I have a saying that I think kind of encapsulates that. And the space between what you say and what you do, the difference, that gap, is where trust goes to die. So you say one thing, you do another thing, trust erodes very, very quickly. This kind of leader, a leader with an idealized influence characteristic within that transformational leadership umbrella, they look after their teams, and they also talk a lot about their values, and their goal is to act as a role model. So, modeling the behavior that they want to see within their teams. If we can go to the next, please. The next component of transformational leadership is something called inspirational motivation. And this is, again, really one of the big differences between leadership and management. And I think something we see in great leaders, their ability to tell a story, their ability to inspire. And this, I'm not saying I'm the greatest leader ever, but one of the things that I personally find extremely rewarding as a leader is helping people achieve things they didn't think were possible. And when you look at startup leaders in particular, and I've interviewed quite a few, and maybe that's another presentation another time, they are incredibly inspirational, right? If you think about it, you're able to get all of you on the call, you're able to get this small number of people on a shoestring budget to build incredible things that you have in your mind and, out of a blank page. And that is an extraordinary ability. And so you see a lot of startup leaderships are incredibly good at inspirational motivation. And if you're not good at it, it's something you can absolutely learn. So the idea is you're a terrific storyteller and very much good at articulating an optimistic vision of the future. They say that entrepreneurs always have that very strong element of delusion because we're constantly optimistic. We constantly believe that something that seems totally insurmountable is possible. And so in a startup environment, that inspirational motivation, I think you see people really, in a lot of startup communities, really indexing high on that. I'm going to just pause actually for a second and see if anybody has any questions, or if I'm going too quickly, if there's anything you want to dig into, because we have time.
Nothing yet so far.
Okay. All right. Don't be shy.
Sometimes it takes a few seconds to type them in. So,
yeah.
So feel free, if you've got questions, if anything's popping up, feel free to populate the Q&A.
Yep. Or raise your hand and say you want to unmute and ask a question. That's totally fine too. You can do that in the Q&A. So, all right, inspirational motivation. If we can go to the next slide, please, which at this point I think is slide 8. Are we all line? Oh, one back. Intellectual stimulation is the next one. So intellectual stimulation is kind of interesting actually, and I'll get into a little more detail on each of these in terms of what they actually look like in just a minute. Intellectual stimulation can actually be a bit stressful. What it is essentially is the ability to stimulate your team's thinking, encouraging people to question assumptions. Well, we can't do that. That's not how it's done. Nobody's ever done that before. Those kinds of things that sometimes you hear, long-held assumptions, and look at things from a new angle. Some people are better at that than others. Some people find it really uncomfortable. And so you kind of have to be judicious and careful about how you use this because it can become very high pressure. And it's uncomfortable, and you're not going to get the best out of people if they're super stressed out.
Actually, we've got our first question.
Great.
So do you have any examples of those types of leaders, famous leaders?
Well, I do, and I'm a little torn about it because I think a lot of the times we tend to use famous leaders as examples. And famous leaders often are in circumstances beyond their control, right? They just arrived there. They're not special, right? They're just often in the right place at the right time. I mean, to be a leader, you have to be successful, all those things, but you know, the circumstances you are faced with are really out of your control. But I can say that I have worked with the chief marketing officer at SAP, who hired me into SAP in 2013 to run digital marketing for globally. He was very much an inspirational leader. Very much, instead of directing us what to do, which is, you know, so we'll get into some of the details around what that looks like in a minute. Instead of directing us what to do, he would say, like, what do you think? What do you think you should do? So giving us that sense of power, that sense of empowerment and control. And he was terrific at painting a vision, right? He would paint a vision of the future, and you'd sit there and just go, wow. And I think somebody like a Steve Jobs is a great example of that. Like, if you think of the vision that he painted, it's often unusual for people to have all four of these components, right? That's a lot to ask of one person. Some people over-index on one thing versus another. But I think somebody like a Steve Jobs can paint that inspirational vision in a way that convinced all of these people to do these crazy things that had never been done before. So I think if you actually look around, there are a lot of them. And many people have components, you know, areas of strength. So yeah, and of course, you know, I'm going to get into another example a little later on, which is kind of a bit of a cliche, but we can talk a little more about that too. Thanks for your question, Richard. And again, yeah, so Bridget, if you want to keep an eye on it, because I probably won't be able to do two things at once. It's too many things at once. So intellectual stimulation. Again, this is really about asking people to be creative and reframe problems as challenges. However, you have to recognize that it is at times uncomfortable for some folks to make that shift, and I'll talk about that in a minute, because there's a bit of a downside to that one. And then individual consideration. It's simply showing that you give a shit, right? Like, do you actually care about your team? That means encouraging individual development, understanding each person's strengths as individuals, delegating, spending time teaching and coaching, spending the time you need to spend in order to help people achieve their potential. It's also really respecting differences, which we'll talk about a little later on as well, and really listening. Like, shut up sometimes. I remember some of the best advice I ever got worked at Much Music and Chum, actually. And a woman who was very much a mentor to me, her name was Mary Powers. She was a communications leader there. She ran communications and marketing. She said one of the best pieces of advice she ever got from someone who mentored her was, sometimes as a leader, you just need to shut up. Like, just shut up and let somebody come and talk to you. Let them listen, you know, be the listener. And don't feel like you need to always hold forth. And you do see, especially as people get more senior, that they really like to take up a lot of airtime. And that can actually be really detrimental when what you need to be often doing is listening to the people around you to help you do your own job better, and to help you understand where some of the challenges are. So I will always remember that sometimes as a leader, you just need to shut up. All right. So if we want to move on to transformational leadership, and I'm going to get into the details now of these aspects of transformational leadership and explain them in terms of what they actually look and feel like, right, if you're experiencing it. So idealized influence. If you have values, but you can't inspire, you're not a leader. Like, I may have very strong values, but if I cannot articulate them in a charismatic, engaging way, who's going to follow me? Nobody's going to understand my values, and they're not going to be engaged. We talked a little bit about trust, right? The difference between what you say and what you do. So you really have to be able to inspire. You have to be consistent in terms of what you say and what you do. And I think one of the things that's important to remember here, and again, we'll talk about this in another context a little later on, is that good and bad leaders all make mistakes. We all make the same mistakes, actually, frequently, but it's how we handle them that is different. So do you acknowledge your mistakes? Are you vulnerable? Do you apologize when you need to? You know, the notion that the leader is this sort of monolithic, you know, perfect person is ridiculous. Everybody is just doing the best they can with what they've got. And truly, truly good leaders acknowledge that in both themselves and in others. And that's not always easy, right? Because there is an expectation sometimes that you're perfect, which of course is not realistic. Nobody is perfect. So let's move on to inspirational motivation and what that looks like. We've all met the person who needs to be the smartest person in the room. They're not a lot of fun. It's not a lot of fun to work for them. It's not a lot of fun to work with them. And it's profoundly limiting, because if you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably in the wrong room. Leaders who inspire and motivate make everyone else in the room seem the smartest. It's that notion of humility and recognizing that you have an opportunity to extract information and from other people. Sorry, someone just walked in. From other people. It's the idea that you do not have all of the answers, and there probably are a lot more people, many brains are better than one, right? This notion of obviously crowdsourced leadership, the idea that people around you, in fact, may have an answer to a big problem that you hadn't even thought of, and you've got to give them space to express that. The other piece here is that it's about getting your team to achieve things, not because they have to, right? Which is management. It's very transactional. It's because they want to. They have bought into the vision because you have inspired them, and they are motivated to help that vision become reality. It's also really important to recognize that true leadership has nothing to do with control. Just because I can hire and fire you doesn't mean I can force you to be a brilliant performer. What I really want to do is motivate you to want to bring your best game to the table. I don't want to force you, coerce you to do that. I want you to understand the vision, to see what your role is in the vision, and then to be motivated to bring everything you have to achieve it, because it's just as much yours as it is mine. And I love this last piece really a lot, because it's kind of counterintuitive, especially as you start off early in your career. And if you've had maybe a bit of a command and control kind of environment or training, which school is often like that, is treating people as you would like them to be. People tend to live up to expectations. And if you expect them to be disconnected, not interested, demotivated, or lazy, for example, they're probably going to meet your expectations. But if you really give them ownership, you give them space, you respect them and allow them to define how they will deliver, they tend to want to prove you right. And so it's a difficult thing to practice, because especially sometimes when you have difficult relationships with people and you're trying to think of how to turn them around, is it constant feedback? Are you really going to get in there and start to manage them? Or maybe are you going to be clear about your expectations and see if they want to meet them? It can be an interesting dynamic in sometimes difficult relationships where you're trying to make something work with somebody. So again, if there are any questions, anybody wants to jump in, I bore myself sometimes with all the talking and the monologue, so you will be breaking it up for me. You will be doing me a favor if you jump in with a question, and I'm happy to hear from you. If we want to go to the next slide, which is intellectual stimulation. So we'll talk a little bit about this, because it can be super stressful. And I have certainly observed in my own career, and as well with others, that sometimes us startup CEOs and startup leaders, sometimes we're kind of intense. And that can be very stressful for people. And there is a fine line between driving results quickly, right, which is 100% a motivator and an imperative when you're starting something new, and not breaking people. I have certainly in my own career driven people too hard and effectively broken them and made the work experience really lousy. And I've watched other people do it too. It is a bit of a leadership hazard, I think, as a startup CEO, because you have the vision, you see it, you want a hard charge towards it. And not everybody can take that, right? People are different.
The fact that you're admitting to that is wonderful.
You know why? Because I'm past it.
Yeah. No, but you know what? That's the growth. That's great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. I mean, it's really, you've seen it. I think any of us who've spent any time in the tech community sees it, right? You see that, and I've spent some time, not recently, but about 4 years ago, I spent some time interviewing startup CEOs. So I talked to Daniel Dubois, I talked to Marcel Lebrun, I talked to Jevon McDonald, who are people I've known all of them for many years. And what were their tips and tricks, right? Like, how do those people, especially those who have created very large, successful companies, how do you get people to put a play on in a barn? Like, I've got an idea. I don't have any money. You're going to leave your stable job to come do this thing, which is totally unproven and a complete gamble. How do they do it? And I think they've achieved the balance between that hard charging speed, right, which is required and is the competitive advantage until you start to get bigger, and then you start to have the same problems everybody else does. That hard charging speed and the vision, and the disruptive kind of let's get in there and make it quickly. How do you balance that with needing people needing different things in terms of their work-life balance and stress, right? Like you can't just drive everyone at 100 miles an hour all the time, because it sucks, right? And people don't want to do it. So anyway, there's a lot to explore there, and I think it is a bit of a challenge. No, it is a challenge, and kind of this duality to many startup CEOs, that they have to have these two pieces: the people piece and the let's go for the moonshot piece, and it can be a hard balance. Okay, so intellectual stimulation. So this is a little bit stressful at times, right? It's a questioning style, and I have been on both ends of this. I've done it to people and I've had it done to me, which is, someone comes into you and says that we have this problem, and they want you to give them the answer. They want you to give them the solution, and they know they need to fix it. They've got to move quickly. They just want a solution, and a manager will give them a solution. A leader will ask them what they think they should do. It takes longer to get to the outcome, because chances are, if you've been doing it long enough, you probably actually know what the answer is. You know what you would do, which is as good as anything if you have a good amount of experience, but you have to let them discover it. And that can be a really difficult transition for people. Historically at school, when you're a junior person, you're told what to do. You're told what the answer should be. If you want to scale your leadership and you want to scale your organization, you have to start to get comfortable with empowering people to come up with their own answers. In the beginning, that can be extremely stressful, because it feels uncertain. They don't know what they're supposed to do. They don't know what the expectations are. But it's one of those things that you practice over time, and people do develop those skills. That is the transition between management and leadership. So and you also challenge assumptions. You go like, well, why do you think that? Why is it that we need to do it that way? Why is it that that's the only option? What about this? What about that? And maybe you might even feel like a bit of a dick for doing that. But the truth of it is, that's where you get the best results. That's where you get the best out of people, and you get the most engagement and sense of ownership from them, because they are, coming up with the solution. They've been empowered to solve the problem. So it is then their problem. They're the CEO of that problem. One of the other areas here, which I find very interesting, because again, it's a little bit counterintuitive, is that as a leader, you need to focus on your own behaviors. You need to focus on what you're giving to people and not worry so much about the outcomes. Because one of the core theories behind transformational leadership is that the inputs take care of the outputs. If you give people space, if you question, you provide a questioning, challenging environment, you have inspired them towards the mission and vision, they'll get there, right? And you have to really kind of do this and get back a little, and really allow them to achieve the outcome that you've all agreed on their own. And that can be difficult. 80% of the time, good leaders consult, they don't tell. They say, well, what would you do? How would you do it? Well, what about this? Oh, that's interesting. What did so-and-so say? Even though you might have the answer, you actually want people to come up with the answer on their own. And that's hard, but boy, is it ever powerful when you start to really do it right. And part of the reason for that is, again, that ownership, that sense of, this is my problem, this is my solution. I am contributing in a really meaningful way, which is so important to personal happiness. One of the highest forms of recognition is giving people a say in what they do. And that's where you get the magic. That's where you get people coming up with things that would never have occurred to you, that might accelerate you even further and faster than you could have possibly imagined. So it's very powerful. It's difficult. It's a skill to be learned, but when you really figure it out, it's incredibly powerful. So if we could go to individualized consideration, the next one. Thanks. This is, like I said before, Bridget, am I in trouble if I swear? Are you muted? I think that's a yeah. I think that's a no. I can swear. No one is.
That's a no. You know what?
That's a no.
Real talk. Real talk.
We're adults, and we're adults. And if you don't like the swears, you can leave. Right? You can leave.
I'll hear about it. It's okay.
You'll hear about it. Actually, I didn't want to say it like that, but it's kind of not going to be my problem.
Oh, Lee says, keep it up. This is hilarious. I love it too. It's refreshing. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah. Oh yeah, I have no filters. But also too, I'm at a point in my life I don't need to have filters. It's so awesome. Anyway,
Filter.
so individualized consideration is like literally giving a shit. Like you actually have to care about your people. And I will tell you, just another moment of being real, when I started my startup, I did not care about my people. I did not want to manage or lead them. I did not want to have to do any personnel, HR kind of stuff. I had no time for it. I just wasn't, I didn't understand what it meant, and I didn't understand why it mattered. It just felt squishy and stupid and wasteful of my time and energy. I just had no patience for it, right? I had no patience for it. That was very painful. That was very, very, very painful. And over time, finally, probably over a period 5 or 6 years, I realized that it is essential. There is no way around it. You actually have to care. You have to care about your people as people. If you really want to achieve amazing things, you want to have a good work life, you want to get the stuff done, and you want to have a good time doing it, which is so important. And a big part of that is that people can't see how you care for them. They can't like see inside your mind that you care. You have to actively show them. And I'm not saying like I wanted them all to die, but I just like wasn't interested in the displays of like, how are things going, and like come and cry in my office. I didn't want that. And actually, and you sort of you can close yourself off to it. And I realized pretty, over that time frame that, wow, that was a really big mistake. And there is no escaping it. You have to show your people that you care. And if you don't care about them, then you're probably not going to achieve much that's very important at all. And certainly not with them, because why would anyone work for someone who doesn't care about them? And it can be very small things, right? It's just simply paying attention to what matters to people and to what's going on in their lives. It's acknowledging the human part of them, which they bring to work. And you cannot escape it, right? And frankly, you know what, when you open yourself up to it, if you struggled with it like I did, it is making those connections and seeing how much more fun things are when you're able to do that, and how much more connected you are as a team. It starts to be really powerful. And now I've completely over-indexed the other way, and I just like love getting people together to do fun things, and sitting and talking with them about what's going on in their lives and whatever. So I literally went from like cold little heart of coal, like I used to say my little of a coal in my chest, to I take a huge amount of pleasure now in coaching people and working with them directly. So anyway, you have to care. And it's a small thing. It's listening. And you know what? The biggest thing is listen. What do people have to say to you? What matters to them? And the other part of it is, if you can't do this credibly, if you don't actually care, forget it. Like, don't even try, because self-interest kills trust. The moment that someone has a sense that you're like putting on the I care face and you don't actually mean it, it's over. It is over. And you probably will never get that trust back again. So it's not about you. Self-interest kills trust. You have to actually mean it. And I believe firmly, unless you're neurologically really diverse, it's something you can learn, right? It's something many people can learn, even if they're not sort of into it. And it is a critical part. It's squishy and sort of like, ew, but you know what? You actually have to give a shit if you want people to help you achieve greatness, which really doesn't seem like that much of a stretch, does it? All right, so if we would move on to the next slide, I'm just gonna take a drink of this giant cup of tea. Okay, so what doesn't work so well? As I sort of previewed earlier, this is short-term results, long-term, and effectiveness. These are three things that are extremely transactional styles of leadership. And they will deliver results in the immediate short term, but that's all. They're very transactional. It's, here, I give you this, you give me this. You will never see that level of performance and excellence and engagement and transformational results with these kinds of leadership styles. And I'm sure many of us, if we worked for others, we've experienced some flavor of these. So the first is contingent rewards. And those are transactions that motivate teams to achieve levels of performance that have been clearly outlined by the leader. So you'll often see this in a sales environment where, you get the steak knives. If you achieve the sales goal, that's great, but it works for the bottom end of the team in terms of performance. That is, you're not going to motivate a super top performer with a set of steak knives or a $10,000 reward in the longer term. You will get short-term results, you'll hit your quarterly numbers, but people have to really be bought into the vision, all the stuff we just talked about, if you want them to go way above and beyond. You will just consistently having people hit goals as opposed to exceeding them or really coming up with transformational concepts or approaches. These can be material rewards or praise. So you did this, thank you. You did this, thank you. It's fine, but as I said, the performance levels just are not as high. Like it's very basic. It isn't emotional. There is no emotional connection, which I think is the common thread in transformational leadership, right? That people are emotionally connected to a vision. They're emotionally connected to the team. They're emotionally connected to you as the leader. And then there's management by exception. This is very common. I actually had a leader say to me once that he was management by exception, good and bad. He was not. 90% of the time, it was the stuff that had gone wrong. So this is attentively and actively focusing the team's attentions on deviations from standards. So typically it's the, why didn't that happen? What was the error here? What happened? How did this happen? And focusing only on those exceptions just makes, as you can imagine, the dialogue is just like 100% negative, right? The only time you're engaging with me is to tell me that something fucked up. And go ahead.
I've definitely.
Yeah, it's very common. Oh, Paul Dodd raised his hand. Unmute, Paul Dodd.
Myself. Okay, I'm unmuted.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, don't be silly. It's my pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, so I was actually just going to go back a slide, Maggie, when you were talking about leadership and how you engage with people and caring or giving a shit.
Individualized consideration. So I need to also say, this is my friend Paul Dodd. Hi, Paul Dodd. Thanks for joining.
But you know what? I've been busting into a bunch of online conversations in the last week about people going digital, trying to push their employees virtual and remote. And the thing that I'm having an issue with, and maybe it's me and my age, is that I think employees give so many unspoken messages through the other three senses that don't come through on camera. And I don't know whether those things like caring and listening are as effective when you're in a virtual remote capacity. And I didn't know if you had any suggestions, because I know you've worked on a global platform, as to how to translate that to something that can be more authentic, or more importantly, more effective.
Yeah, Paul, that is such a good question, and it's super timely. I actually literally had a conversation this morning with a company in Ireland that I'm going to take this offline and talk with you about it as well, because I think it's of interest. That they have a tool that could help bridge that gap a little. And I think that's the zone that we're in, because this is just what it is, right? And you're right, you miss all the nuance. Being on Zoom calls is exhausting. And I'm not even able to look at your body language, right? Like I'm not able to watch you interact with someone and think, what just happened there, right? All this kind of unconscious ambient stuff that you pick up from being in a team, like just in a physical space. And I think this reality isn't going to change anytime soon for many of us. So what are the tools that can help replace some of those things? I think is a question. I think it's an opportunity. And I think it's a question that we have to answer, because this is it. Like this part we can't fix. So what's the other stuff? And I don't know. What are you seeing, Paul? Are you seeing people think about that? Are they there yet? Like what's?
Again, I don't know if it's a demographic thing, but what I'm seeing is that and I mean this politely, but the 20-somethings love the idea that they're just executing and involved with a set of transactions and doing stuff. But it's not like herding cats, but there's going to need to be some guidance. So that coaching mindset you spoke about, instead of managing in the traditional form, plays into that. But I'm seeing some disconnects. And again, I hate to drop it, but Shopify says they're going to make everything digital, but they're going to dump 180,000 square feet of retail or office space they've just invested in 18 months ago. if I was the investor, I'd be like, whoa, that's a big commitment to walk away from and to be pushing everyone into the cloud. And I don't know if I'm getting the same ideation. I'm not getting the same culture. I'm not getting the same interactions with people. And that's the 360. It's not necessarily manager to employee. It could be employee to peer. It could be whatever. But I'm just getting lost in this conundrum right now because of COVID. And I'm seeing a lot of leaders executing and doing transactions, but they're not playing it forward to something that's more strategic.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, something, we can't just, like, Zoom is not the answer, right? Like we're missing, we will be missing things, and we have to be, and I think part of it's experimentation and just paying attention, right? Like just being aware of what's missing, which sometimes that's really hard, right? So yeah, that's a great question and very timely. So I'm actually going to follow up with you on this conversation I had, because I think it would be of interest to you. Yeah, and I'd love to get your feedback on it.
Sure.
It's just it's a platform, performance management platform out of Dublin. But anyway, it's very interesting. Okay, thanks. Alrighty, so if we can go to what doesn't work so well. Okay, so we were talking about contingent rewards and then management by exception. Yeah, it's super fun. Thanks for telling me all the things that are going wrong. You know, a lot of stuff goes well too. It's really demotivating. I think most of us have been there. It's not effective. Even if you think, like my former boss did, even if you think you're actively balancing, probably you're not. So being very aware of that behavior is really critical. And then finally, laissez-faire. And some people like this, but it's not good. And that is essentially failure to be a leader. Absent when needed. I mean, at least somebody's not breathing down your neck. But when I need you, when I need a decision, when I need a direction, being really, some people, you watch them struggle to commit, right? Like they really don't want to, sometimes you think you don't want to commit to a direction because you're worried, if someone disagrees with you later, you're going to get in trouble. But sort of this absence of leadership, avoiding decisions, really kind of letting people figure it out for themselves, and or potentially, bear the consequences of the results on their own, which is not something a leader does. A leader very much provides air cover and makes sure their people are supported. So these things, you see them, they're not abusive or anything, like they're not, beyond the pale, but they don't work. And so being mindful and self-aware of your own habits, especially around management by exception, which is so common, is really critical. All right, so let's go to slide 15 and get into okay, what's going on now? And I love this quote. So it's from William Brennan. He's been dead for some time, but he was a former US Supreme Court justice. And essentially it means this, right? Things suck, but true leadership looks trouble in the eye and does what needs to be done. And I do love to question that notion of, like, people like Winston Churchill and others, they were born great leaders. Well, no, they were not. They simply, brought a set of skills to a situation that allowed them to lead people through great trouble. And it's easy to look at the world, the people who helped the world through some of these things and imagine that they were magic, they had a special set of skills that uniquely prepared them. And to a degree, they really don't. They simply decided to meet the challenge rather than wishing it wasn't there, right? They just faced it head on. And of course, the rest, as they say, is history. And the point here is that we all have this capability. It's how we choose and whether or not we choose to use it. And there are a series of, if you want to go to the next slide, these are the questions we ask ourselves. Like, what do you need to do? Who do you need to be? And nobody's going to be Winston Churchill. As much as I really like Winston Churchill. I read the Eric Larson biography of him a couple weeks ago, and oh my God, I would love to have spent time with someone like that. He was just such a unique person. Brilliant and fun and a fighter. And a lot of, those qualities came together to allow him to lead his country through a critical existential crisis in the form of the Blitz. So that's great. I'm not Winston Churchill. You're not Winston Churchill. So what are the things that we as individuals, without his background, without his education, without his power, can do to help our people through difficult times like the one we're facing now? And if we could go, I just want to make sure, if we can go to the next slide, please. So there are a series of things. There are a series of 6 things. The first one, and these are tips, like write these suckers down, because this is the difference between good, like mediocre, and great. And the biggest piece here that I can't emphasize enough is consistency, right? Consistently doing these things. You don't just do them once. You do them again and again and again. And when you're tired of doing them or talking about them, you do them again. Because what people need from you is consistency and a structure. And they need to know that it's going to be okay. And these 6 steps we'll go through now are the things that will help them believe it's going to be okay. And it might not be okay. It might be okay a little bit. It might be very bad. But no matter what, we're all going to survive. And this is the way forward. So the first, show up and be visible. Just show up. Communicate and be present regularly. Say something. Even that you're working on a plan. And you see this mistake, early days, especially of COVID. What's going on? We don't know. And we all wait. And we all wait. What's happening? Well, we don't know yet. Because there was, and I was certainly a part of organizations where you felt like they were waiting for the perfect plan to be put into place before they said anything to anyone. It's like, guys, we have to decide now if we're going to close all the offices next week. Simply say, and yet there was, and I was in an environment where there were delays because we wanted to have everything figured out. And you know what? No, that perfect is absolutely, in a crisis, perfect is the enemy of good. Say something, even that you're working on a plan, rather than being absent because you don't have everything figured out. Perfect is the enemy of good. Just say, yes, I acknowledge the crisis. We are trying to figure it out. We will be back as soon as there's more information, or we'll be back tomorrow with an update. So that, and you see that with obviously leaders like in Ontario, like Doug Ford and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, like one of the constant things you will notice is regular appearances in public at a set time. And that really is about that show up and be visible. And this for us, for individuals and startups and so on, it could be, just a weekly half-hour, daily or weekly half-hour call. We're just going to give everyone an update half an hour at this time, or, we're going to get together, we do Agile, we're going to get together every morning, and just be, even if you're not Agile, just, just having a touch point so you can connect with people on a regular basis and be present. Next slide, please. Offer hope, right? It's going to be okay. Even if okay is, subjective. You need here, and your goal is to elevate your team and their emotions above the day-to-day. It's super easy to panic when you feel like you're underwater. What's going on? We have to figure out this, we have to figure out that, we have to figure out this, we have to figure out that. Oh, what about this? What about this? It's overwhelming. This cascade of things coming down that you don't know which thing is the most important thing. The leader's job here is to reassure your team that there is a lifeboat, there's a plan being worked on, and there's a spot for everyone in the lifeboat. You're going to make sure of it. You're going to make sure it's okay. You're going to help people sort through things and figure out what to do. So the idea that, that consistency, that confidence, even if you don't feel it, that it's going to be okay, because you know what, it is going to be okay. Like it is. You don't need to know everything, but if you're focused, if you're doing these things, it is going to be okay. It's just a matter of when. Next slide, please. Do we have any questions so far? Looks like is there one, or is that an awful? Yeah.
Comment, yeah.
Paul was saying in the chat, I don't think everyone can see the chat, but Paul's point is scrum calls, daily meetings, daily presence. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Just show up. Like, it's such a small thing. You don't have to have all the words or all the answers. Just show up. Be visible, be accessible. The third, and I think we're on the right slide, is emphasize with the issue. Again, this goes back to kind of if you have a little black heart of coal, sometimes this kind of stuff can be difficult, because if you do feel like it's okay, like you do feel like it's going to be all right, not everybody's going to feel that way, because people are different, right? You may have team members, colleagues that are far more anxious than you are, and they may not share your, like, it's fine, it's going to work out perspective. And others are like fast processors. Like, some people can see tomorrow, and some people can see next December. And I don't know if there's a neurological difference, but it's definitely a perception difference. And you have to give space for all of that. That some people may become extremely anxious and need to be sort of talked down regularly or communicated with regularly. Others may see the vision and the opportunity that no one's even imagined yet. What you as the leader need to do is acknowledge their fears, empathize with the issue, don't dismiss it, and then take them back to number 2. It's going to be okay. Here's the plan. Here's the plan to get to the plan. Here's what we're going to do. I got it. You got it. Your colleagues are strong. We know what we're doing. We're going to be all right. But don't dismiss their fears. That is not productive, and it's just not helpful. Like, it's just not helpful. Even if you think it's ridiculous and they're being completely over the top, that's how they feel. And if you don't acknowledge it, then they bury it. They're not bought in. They're freaking out all the time, and you're not getting the best out of them, which at times like this, you really need everyone, all hands on deck. So the next slide, please. So now look ahead. So while you have acknowledged what is currently happening, yes, I see it, I feel it, I see a reaction, I hear you, help people see the horizon, help give them context. Because I remember early days, especially with COVID, it was sort of like, this is completely and utterly overwhelming. Where are we going to end up? We have to go home, and do we have enough food? Like, the things you kind of went through were extraordinary. And weirdly, now that we're, almost 3 months in, I guess just 2.5 months in, it's remarkable how normal it all feels. Not much has actually changed, but we have different context. We have the context of more time, an awareness through lived experience that, for most of us, lucky enough to be financially okay, hopefully. I hope everybody is. But for many of us, unless you're actually critically ill, it's probably going to be okay between government subsidies and various other things. You're at least in the short term going to be okay. Now is not forever, right? That moment of panic is not forever. It's not sustainable forever. Human nature won't allow it to be. Help your people see the context as quickly as they can, because that will get them over the moment of panic. Placing a moment in time within a larger context will help people see that panic today is a waste of energy, or worse, right? That we don't even know the context of this situation, so save your panic for later. In a respectful way, but the truth of it is, like, you're wasting your energy if you panic now, because, we really don't even have the context yet. And help people see that there is an end, if not an end that we can see, that there's a bigger picture, that you'll figure it out. But actually, in many cases, for many technology companies, there are opportunities that they're not yet realized. Next slide, please. And then help make sense of the situation. This is a little more practical, a little more tactical. You absolutely do not have all the answers. Nobody does. If anyone does, they're a big fat liar. But you do need to interpret events for your team. You need to help them understand the context of what's going on. So, for example, one of the companies I work with decided that they were going to shut down and go on life support. They were in a spot between 2 industries that essentially collapsed. And they realized they had enough funding in the bank and a supportive board to sort of just go into hibernation for 6 months. Very stressful. However, here's the context. They didn't just do it and not tell anybody what was happening next. They explained the rationale to the team. Obviously everyone was able to get unemployment benefits, which is good, and probably a top up from the CERB. And then, the vision for the company is, in 6 months or a shorter period of time, they may have to pivot if things don't look like they're happening more quickly. They'll start to make a series of decisions that help them understand when they can reopen. That is so much better than you're laid off. And even when you don't have all the information, just explaining to people the process you will move through to get to the right answer, or an answer, is enormously helpful. It just relieves a lot of stress. There's a sense of, again, context, a bigger picture. Right now is not everything, that, things continue to move forward. So don't leave people to figure it out for themselves. Tell them exactly what the impact will be for them today, and then how you're going to take them to the next places as best you can, knowing, again, that we don't know everything. And that's fine to say too, like, I don't have all the answers, but here's the process we're going to go through to try to figure it out. Next slide, please. And then finally, obviously, easier said than done today, have a plan. It doesn't have to be perfect. And this is very true early on. And I think we see that from our leaders, right? That there are iterations. Well, we're going to do this. Okay, so we did that, and then we looked at what happened. Okay, and then we're going to do this. Okay, so that seemed to help. And then we're going to do this. And I think, and it's not fair of political leaders or business leaders, this expectation that you have to have it all figured out. Well, if no one's ever been here before, how are we ever going to do that? That's an unreasonable expectation. And so setting expectations early that, hey man, we're just doing the best we can to try to figure this out, is perfectly acceptable language to come from a leader. And it's realistic. It's the truth. And give yourself the space to do that. Give yourself the space to say, here's the plan for the next month. And here's a plan to get to another plan, or here's a plan to get to a pivot, or whatever it is that you realize you're going to have to do over time. And take that based approach. It's fine if it allows you to move forward while you figure out the more complicated stuff. Like, don't get into analysis paralysis where you feel like you have to figure out the whole picture, because you can't. Just figure out what you can figure out and move on. Move in incremental steps. Be very clear that's what you're doing, because a partial plan is better than no plan at all, right? And it's better than just sitting there paralyzed, which is it. I mean, the outcome of that is very simple, which is it's over. So nobody wants that. So that really is the end of the leading through difficult times piece. If we can go to the final slide, the one thing I really want to emphasize for all of you on the call, regardless of your role, is be good to yourself, be good to your leaders, be good to each other, because everyone is just doing the best they can, right? Nobody has a roadmap. You know, to say to people that they don't know what they're doing or they don't know the way forward. Well, you know, I don't think any of us really does. And it is kind of an irritating and unreasonable criticism, again, of business leaders or political leaders. Like, listen to the experts, try to figure it out. But nobody has a roadmap. So there's no well-worn path to success like this, you know, in an environment like this where the livelihoods of millions are on the line. And what you have are the tools you walked into this with, right? You have the trust of your team, you have your ability to empathize, and your ability to be resourceful, and then be your authentic self, right? Be who you are and show people how you're feeling. It's normal. Be vulnerable, you know, reassure your team that you're going to make it. And you will. Like, we just do the best we can, one foot in front of the other. And that's really all there is, right? There isn't much more. But hopefully this was useful to those on the line. And I really appreciate the questions we've had so far. If we want to unmute and maybe have a little bit more of a discussion, if everyone's, thanks, Richard. You know, if everyone's in a spot to do that, that would be great.
Paul's raised his hand again. If you'd like to unmute Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, you know what? It's the one thing that's hit me with isolation is the fact that, you know, it's a level playing field all of a sudden. And I mean that in the human term. And, you know, whilst it's great being a leader and helping people sort of elevate their skills, their capability, their time management and all those sort of things, I do find it challenging sometimes to dig deep. And I just wondered if you had any tips and tricks for leadership around how they can be a little bit more prepared, how they can be a little bit more capable in this environment. Anyway, just throwing it out there.
Yeah. So I'm in an interesting spot right now because I'm not currently leading a team of people, right? But I'm on boards. And every board that I've been on, as you can imagine, we have the oh fuck meeting, right? Where everyone goes, okay, the world is over. And what I personally been finding, part of it is a function of the role, right? As a board member, you are nose in, hands out, as they say. But what I've been finding is I've been doing interesting to explore whether this is relevant for leaders in business generally, team leaders, is that I've been doing a lot more point solutions, if you will, right? It's like, you have this problem here. Let me help you with that problem, like a telecommuting policy, right? You know, this is a culture opportunity, right? This is an opportunity to set some culture around how we want to talk to each other and expectations around work and trust. Because the prior telecommuting policy was like, thou must be at thy desk for 8 hours a day. And now that we're moving totally remote, it's an opportunity to actually set cultural expectations around. So I find I'm getting into those things and really kind of looking for the peaks of where, as a leader, I can make a lot of impact by helping people rethink things. So I find I'm doing less general stuff and more very specific, high impact stuff. Because the general stuff is really hard when you're remote and you can't be in a room together, right? Like I can't ambiently sort of listen to you in a super empathetic way and kind of tease out what's going on with you in quite the same way as if we're sitting in a room together. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm definitely doing a lot more coaching too, right? Like a lot more coaching and kind of prodding with CEOs and other board members. So, I just find this, the activity is a lot more specific, right? We're looking at very specific things to try to address those, which is a little different. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of what I'm seeing.
Okay.
Any other questions out there? Hey, Lee, you want to unmute?
Hi.
Yeah.
Great. I just wanted to ask more from my own personal experience as kind of the 20-something who has grown up with technology from that side. I'm actually not having an issue with that interpersonal connections, especially since I worked remotely before the whole COVID issue, and I grew up with this technology. So I'm wondering if people are connecting in with the people that they're managing or leading, and finding out if they are having the issues that they're perceiving they're having. Because and I'm absolutely not saying that, oh yeah, we're fine, like don't worry about us, but
Yeah.
it is the are there voices in there? Are you hearing that these problems are actually there?
I think what I'm hearing is that companies are worried about how to sustain culture. They're worried about a couple things. They're worried about how to maintain the connective tissue between people who no longer have a physical space to be in, especially if it was a majority in office environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of those. There are lots of those. Companies, I agree, like, company like SAP that, I mean, I would say 50% of the company at least works remotely. Most teams have multiple remote members. For them, maintaining a lot of that stuff is a little less, I would argue, a little less difficult in the immediate short term. Longer term might be more. But I think the challenge and the things that I hear people thinking and worrying about is how to maintain the connective tissue between folks who used to have a physical space to be in together, and how to keep the trust, right? Because you and I would trust each other because we had multiple interactions over time that were largely in person. When you take that away, and I need to give you feedback about something that is over the phone or via Zoom or text or whatever, that is a very different thing. So I think, and this is obviously probably more old school type companies, or companies that have to be in person for whatever reason. So I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of concern about how do you. And the other thing I'm hearing, which is very interesting, is that a lot of CEOs are really enjoying the increased agility, increased collaboration, the speed at which things are moving, the bureaucracy is falling away. And what I'm also hearing is at one of Canada's major banks and at a couple of European companies, the CEOs are like, how do we keep this going, right? And that's a great question. I think the tools, the approaches are probably similar, right? So this is like, there's no roadmap, right? But it's not something we can just go like, oh, well, never mind. Like we have to do some things. We have to do some additional things to make what's happening right now sustainable.
Great, thank you. Just a quick follow-up question, if it's okay. Do you think it's going to go back to quote unquote normal? Do you think this is going to be a real culture shift in how we do work and where we work?
Yeah, I hate, like, it's scary to say, right? It's really scary to say, but I don't think there is a normal anymore. Like, there was the before times where we hugged each other, right? And and then I think there's the what comes next. And I also don't think that we are realistically going to see kind of a stabilization probably until 2021, because there will be second and third waves of COVID, and we'll see the lockdowns come in place again, which you're already seeing in places that are a little further ahead, right? They open up, there's a bit of a surge, they close down again. So I think for survival's sake, and as a leader, for survival's sake, and for our own selves, a slow and steady acknowledgement of there is no going back. There's only how do we make this work, and in a flexible way, is really the approach.
Great, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for the question.
I was hoping to weigh in here. So Innovation Factory, so some things that we've done to increase connectivity is, so we already were using Slack. So we've really ramped up our Slack usage and even created channels that are a little bit more lighthearted to kind of show people we care about their day-to-day. I mean, it kind of came about organically, but that's one platform we're using. Verbella is another one that we've had a really great time with. It's a gamified office platform, essentially. So we've recreated a bit of a sense of place, and we use it for meetings, but we also use it for those kind of cooler chats, like the ones where you wouldn't have really had a chance, you know, via Zoom or an email to kind of have a nuanced conversation. We can go into these virtual offices, which just requires a download, and then just kind of visit each other a little bit. So those are some things that we've done as a team, and also set regular communication times individually with our staff members. So my director has set, you know, bi-weeklies and touch points on a regular occurring basis. They're flexible in terms of timing, just to respect everyone's time. You know, everybody at Innovation Factory has different things going on, kids, you know, taking care of elderly. So there's all sorts of things going on. So personally, I think there's lots of great things that have come out of this. Like, we're innovators. We looked at ways that, okay, so how do we look forward? You know, we can't always be looking back at what worked before. It very likely won't work going forward. You know, most things will be virtual, we suspect, till the end of the year, very easily.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Any events I signed up for that were group things were all canceled well into November. So I really don't think big group gatherings, you know, networking is going to change. And we saw how rapidly Zoom became the thing du jour, but it's not going to stay that way. Competitors are going to come in. Yep. They're going to come up with new platforms, great ways for us to connect. This is an area as well where, you know, people working in communications ICT have great opportunity to you know, push platforms that do this, or really enhance them to really help people connect in meaningful ways. So sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but those are things that we've done in-house to, like, and these sessions as well. We started mentor panels with our clients where they can see our executives in a meeting and talk with them real time. You know, we keep them nice and short so as not to exhaust everybody. Round tables virtually, sessions. So, you know, we had our big life science competition. We had to spin that in a week from like 150, like, and Jennifer will tell you that was, you know, that wasn't anything. But then this great opportunity came, and we had even more people attend than would have had access in person. So, you know, like, there's opportunity in these challenges. And I think, as you were saying, Maggie, about really focusing on high impact things and really addressing issues as they come up, I think that's key. That's really key, is get rid of all the fluff. And I think this has naturally kind of gotten rid of all of that stuff, you know, like, things become
bureaucracy,
razor sharp right now as to what's important. So
listen, I have a friend who's really senior at one of the big banks, and she has a lot of board access and a lot of CEO access. And she was saying that, you know, before, if she wanted to go talk to the CEO, or she wanted to, you know, give him some slides for something, or she wanted to present to the board, she had to go through this whole process through all of the, you know, the executive directors and chiefs of staff and, you know, board assistants and all that stuff. She had to go through all of that before they could have a conversation. Like, everyone would have to vet all of the stuff. And she's like, that doesn't happen anymore. She just calls him.
No, exactly.
Like, the bureaucracy just went away because nobody has any time for it. We don't have the mental time for it. Like, we don't have the space for it. And we're too busy trying to figure other stuff out. I would argue as well that there is a risk, and people are seeing this, right? Without a commute, without a boundary between work and home. A lot of people are working more. They're working longer. They're struggling, right? We all are, because we all are, because there's no, like, I'm in my bedroom, you know, like, there's no boundary. And that, I think, is something that leaders really need to keep an eye on as well. That the opposite of, oh, well, how do we know they're working if they're working at home?
I know.
You know, the opposite is in fact the case, that people are actually working longer and more. And so their wellness, you have to take care of their wellness, right? And you have to really force people to do that. And I will say that one of the CEOs I advise, I gave him very serious shit last week about getting back into a routine of exercising and a few other things, because you just can't function. Like it's super stressful, even though we're all at home and everything in my pajamas, it's super stressful, and you need your intellectual capacity. You need your frontal cortex operating. Yeah. And if you don't take care of yourself, it doesn't happen, right? You're very ineffective. So actually kind of interesting to think about, like, it'll be interesting to see what the wellness impact is, because wellness always kind of felt like a nice to have, and it's a bit squishy. It's a little, you know, okay, fine. But it's pretty serious now. Like now it's pretty serious.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll make or break a business, you know, like it could easily make or break.
Burnout.
Yeah.
Yep. Burnout.
Sure. Yeah. All this screen time, the stress of what's going on in the world, paired with, you know, the uncertainty of what's happening at work. Absolutely. Yep. We're all feeling it. We're all feeling it. Zoom fatigue, you know, it's like all those things. So it certainly is unprecedented, as everyone's saying. And Paul Dudd actually said, yes, mindfulness is essential, just not intuitive for me, but I think it will be a differentiator. And I have heard some VCs look for those disciplines.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I can honestly say that if I were going to invest or get involved with a company and it was one of these hard charging bullshit, like Gary Vee type of CEOs, like, you know, crush it, I would be like, you know, you're not going to make it. In this environment, you're not going to make it. You're going to burn your people out. You're going to be super shitty at decision making because you're exhausted, and it's just not going to work. Like that balance, but the balance is to achieve a goal. It's not like, oh, everybody needs recess. It's like, no, you need mental space. It actually makes you better. You know, like we're all going for the same outcome, but it's whether or not you're going to sustainably be able to get there. Yeah,
absolutely. No, this is great. This is great. Thank you so much, everybody, for
it's my pleasure. Any more questions?
Yeah, any more questions? We're at 2:12. We've got till 2:30, but if we want to end out a little early, that's okay. I think this was a great session. You know, small turnout, but sometimes that allows for more interactivity. So that's great.
Which is nice.
We're happy to see everybody here today.
Me too, yeah.
And Maggie, this was honestly so refreshing. And
it's the swears.
I love the swears.
The swearing.
It's fine. You know what? It's like, I think we all have been muttering under our breaths enough. So it's kind of nice to hear it out loud in, you know, a real talk kind of conversation. So I really appreciate that. And you talking to us today. So many good insights. And I've experienced a lot of what you say, and yeah, I'm very pleased. So thank you so much.
Good. Thanks. And thanks for everybody who joined.
Yes.
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to text you. I'm going to text you later, Paul. I want to talk to you about this company.
No worries. You guys take care. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to everybody, and we will see you again at another session. And I'll be contacting Maggie about the fall, because I think.
Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good afternoon. Stay cool.